Hello everybody, my name is Kristen and I'm going to be demonstrating today how to do a watercolor moon using very simple tools that you can find around the house. The tools that you'll need for this demonstration are paper, specifically watercolor paper will be really helpful for the moon, a pencil, an eraser if you tend to make errors like I do, a bowl from your kitchen, any kind of bowl really, as long as it fits on the page. And then later on we'll be using some watercolor paints. So you can use a pressed palette like this one, or you can use liquid watercolors, whatever you have, and it doesn't really matter what color. The first step to creating a watercolor moon is to lay your bowl upside down on the page wherever you want your moon to be located. So I'm thinking I want my moon to be right in the middle. This bowl will actually be used to trace a perfect circle. Not sure that there's actually ever a perfect circle, but this definitely comes closer than trying to freehand it. So at this point in your process, you're gonna mix a couple different colors. What you're gonna mix most of first though is the base for your moon. So if you can see here, we want to fill this entire space and we're gonna do it in a couple different layers. So whatever the primary color for your moon is, that's what you're gonna mix the most of because that's what's gonna cover the whole bottom base here. So I got a mug here with some water. I am going to go with kind of a traditional gray base, so I'm gonna mix that. So I have mixed a light gray over here, which is gonna be my base, a dark gray, which is gonna add a lot of contrast and texture for one of my top layers. And then I decided to kind of go outside the box, do kind of a fantasy type of moon. And so I've added some light pink and some dark pink kind of burgundy color. So those will be part of the details on top. But what we're gonna focus on right now is this light gray here. Okay, so we're on the painting stage. The most important part of watercolor painting is actually using the water to your advantage. So what we're actually gonna do is first coat the entire space that we want paint to be on with a clear layer of water. My water's a little bit dirty, so it will actually help us to see where I'm painting here since it's just water. You're gonna wanna try your best to stay within the lines on this one. Wherever the water goes, that will kind of seal in where your paint is going to stay. Because you drew on a fairly thin line with pencil, it's very likely that the paint will cover that line and you won't actually see the pencil in the end. However, if it's there and it bothers you at the end, you can always go any space where there's no paint, you can use an eraser to get rid of those pesky lines. So what's important here is that we don't oversaturate the page with water. We want enough so that it stays wet for when we're gonna go back with the paint. This will help it to blend really nicely. It'll help it to cover the entire moon's base layer in a consistent way, which is nice for making it look fairly realistic. What you'll find if you oversaturate this with water is that it will actually bleed once you're adding other colors on top. The pressure of the water can actually cause it to break that seal that we're trying to create for blending. Also, a great part about this is if you make a mistake, say you go way out of the line, you can just wait for it to dry and then you can go back and recreate your base layer of water. All right, so we have our base layer of water and we're going to very quickly, before the water dries, go in with our base. And so for this, we're gonna basically be going right over where we put the water. And once we spread the entire color within this moon shape, then we'll actually be able to create a bunch of texture, and you can see it's gonna be really easy to do that because of the way that it blends in with the water. You can also see here that as we've formed that seal, the water staying exactly within our circle. So it kind of helps us to keep within the lines in a way here. You can also see that this technique can really lend to creating some nice shadows, which is really nice and creates a good dynamic moon. If you're ever going to use a big paintbrush, this is the layer that you're going to do that, so you can spread everything really evenly all at once. Another really interesting thing about choosing your colors for the moon is that you'll see that once it's saturated in water, the color is actually much lighter than what you originally mixed. And then it gets even lighter once the color dries on your page. So that's something to keep in mind when you're mixing your colors. So we're just going to make sure here that we have our whole moon covered. You can see it's nice and shimmery because we have a lot of water. Just enough, not too much. And it looks like we covered all the space. So here's our base layer. Okay, so same idea. We want to paint our second layer, which adds some of those details while this base layer is still wet. If we're finding that there are some spots that are much drier, we can always add a little bit of water or a little bit more paint in those areas. But at this point, you're gonna go for your next color. I usually like to stick with a color that's in the same kind of family as the base layer, because this is gonna add some of the texture and the kind of shadows that you'd see in the moon. And so I am going to take, it's almost a black. I've mixed a dark gray with a little bit of dark green. And this is the best part, very fun, is that you're actually just going to create some texture in your moon here. And you can see how the color spreads super nicely in a really natural way without you actually having to, you know, create all of the details on your own. It's actually the magic of watercolor that the way that it spreads is its beauty. If you don't know quite where to put your second layer, you can always look at a photo of the moon. There's a lot of really beautiful detailed photos online that you can access, and that can kind of help you figure out where you're going to be providing some shading, which ultimately kind of shows the terrain of the moon. Sometimes if you find that you want it to be spread a little bit more dramatically, you can add some water. And really you can make it as dark or as light as you want. You can add as much details to your second layer as you'd like. You can even kind of go darker in some spots. That just adds interest to your painting. In this part, I find that there's no really wrong answer. Whatever you decide to do is going to look awesome because it's the magic of the watercolor spreading in the wet on wet technique that you've used. In this moon, I think because I'm a little bit darker here, I'm going to try to create a shadow effect over here. So I'm going to go and actually go back and pull some of this paint around the edges here. This is where you really want to be careful that you are staying within the lines, because once you add some dark to the edges, it'll be a lot more obvious where your shape has kind of morphed a little bit. And the more natural of a of the change between where the shadow is and where it's not is going to make it look like a more natural moon. But hey, we're artists and we're painting. It doesn't have to look completely realistic. It can also look super fun and creative. There are a lot of moons, not just the Earth moons, and they all look very different. So really, no one can tell you that you've gone wrong. Okay, so I have that layer done. I'm pretty happy with that. Hopefully you can see it and it's not too blurry on my phone camera. At this point, you could choose to go darker for your second layer or go lighter. You could also, while things are wet, sprinkle a little bit of salt on the wet paint, especially in the darker spots. And this will create a really cool effect that will be almost like little sparkles, or it will kind of accent the craters that we've created in the moon. Sometimes your cat comes and drinks your paint water while you're painting. That's probably not good for you. Okay, so we are going to move on to the next layer. Because we've dried a little bit on our paint on the moon, you're gonna wanna add some water wherever you're gonna put the new layer. Otherwise, it's not gonna spread and have the same consistent texture as what you've already created here. So I've painted some water over top, and now I'm gonna go in. Okay, so for the final layer, we're gonna use this light pink that I created here. And instead of using this brush that I've used for the entire piece so far, I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush with a really short part of the brush that's the bristles. This is gonna allow me to do really fine details that I wanna do without it possibly moving around in a place that I don't want it. I find it gives me more control than something like this, that if I'm trying to make a little dot, it's too long, and so it will, you know, not be a perfect dot that I want. And I'm gonna use this splatter that happened naturally on our third layer to kind of give us an inspiration for the small details that we wanna add around the moon, which are totally make-believe. I don't know, maybe there's a pink moon in the universe, but we're gonna create one now, and I'm gonna add little dots to it. So this is fairly light, and it's also in some spots that are still wet, so it's not gonna be as vivid. If you add your little details, or however you want to do that, to components of the moon that are totally dry, it's gonna allow you a lot of control and a lot of kind of fine lines that are very solid and not as quite blended in. I like to do this within the moon, but I think it would also look really awesome if it kind of was spreading around the outside. I might add one or two here and there that are gonna be by themselves, and those are actually I'm gonna use to try to add a little bit of some kind of magical details at the end. So we'll see where that goes. I like how this is kind of going off of the page, so I'm going to actually kind of mimic that over here. Almost feels like there's some kind of like, I don't know, magic that's kind of radiating off of this. It's always good to get more colors in there, so I might actually add a little bit of that darker color over here. Okay, so off to our final detail that we're gonna do. And on this one, I'm actually gonna switch to my longer bristle that's still very fine. And I'm going to just use white. White will dry in a much lighter way than it will appear when we first create it. And I'm gonna create just a little bit of a star effect right where our single dots are. And what I'm hoping that this will do is it will kind of create a spherical look on our moon. If not, just provide a little bit more interest. Once that dries, we'll be able to see it a little bit better. It won't be quite this textured. It'll dry and soak in a little bit to the rest of the paint, but we'll still be able to see it. I'm gonna add a tiny one over here. just very small and fine. Ah, we have one left over here. And if it seems really simple, it was that simple. All you have to do is create layers, stop when you love it, and then you have your beautiful watercolor moon. Thanks so much for joining.